When I looked into the woods at my family cabin, I never considered someone might be looking back. I'm 36 years old and have been escaping to my family's cabin in North Conway, New Hampshire for as long as I can remember. The cabin sits tucked away behind the main road, hidden at the very end of a secluded strip where maybe 8 houses line each side. You can barely see any of the other cabins, each of them surrounded by their own cluster of dense, dark woods pressing in from every direction. Ours was even more private than most, sitting in the furthest corner on the left all by itself, completely swallowed by the trees. Being there felt like stepping into another world, one untouched by time. There are no distant hums of traffic, no voices from passing strangers, just the sounds of nature, birds calling through the trees, the steady rush of the nearby creek, and in winter, the soft whisper of snow settling over everything. The cabin is built entirely of wood, classic and homey, with the front wall made almost entirely of towering glass panels. They stretch higher than anyone who's ever stayed there, framing the woods like a living painting, beautiful by day and hauntingly dark at night. A wooden deck wraps around the front, the perfect place to eat in the summer, lounge in the crisp mountain air, or sneak out for a smoke. It's always been a peaceful place, quiet, familiar, and surrounded by a small town filled with vacation homes, friendly locals, and a charming shopping strip with quirky little stores selling handmade soaps, old-fashioned candy, and cozy ski town essentials. The main draw for most visitors, including my family, is the nearby ski resorts, but for me, the cabin itself has always felt like a retreat. I wouldn't call myself paranoid, but I've always been a little easily spooked, just enough to be cautious, but not the type to overreact unless something genuinely feels off. And right now, I know I'm not overthinking this, and I'm terrified. This past week, I went up to the cabin for what was supposed to be a normal, relaxing trip. My stepfather, my boyfriend, my 10-year-old son, and 2 of his friends joined me, making for a fun group trip to end the last few days of the kids' February vacation. Everything was going so well, just a normal getaway. My stepfather drove his car out separately, while my boyfriend and I drove our car in with the boys. The plan was for my son and his friends to ride back home with my stepfather on Friday morning so he could get a few good nights' sleep before school started up again, while my boyfriend and I would drive back on our own on Wednesday since he had a few extra days off. The week started off great. We had dinner at some of the local restaurants, explored the downtown area, and of course, made our obligatory stop at the infamous candy store on the strip, the one the kids absolutely refuse to skip whenever we're in town. And if I'm being honest, I also refuse to skip. I've got a ridiculous sweet tooth, so I'll take any excuse to stock up. The days flew by in a blur of laughter, good food, and crisp mountain air. Before I knew it, Friday had arrived, and it was time for the boys to head back home with my stepfather. As much as I was looking forward to spending some alone time with my boyfriend, there was a pang in my chest as I watched my squishy little 10-year-old boy drive off with his crew. I already missed him, but looking back now, knowing how the night unfolded, I'm so grateful he wasn't there. That's what really unsettles me about all of this. Nothing weird happened, not until my stepfather's car disappeared down the long, winding driveway, leaving behind only our small car in its place. I don't know if that's what made us a target, the car being alone in the driveway, or if it was just an awful coincidence, but from the moment his taillights vanished, something shifted. It was around 3 a.m., and while most people would have been asleep, my boyfriend and I were curled up on the couch, the night owls and us unwilling to follow. We watched old movies, the glow of the TV flickering across the walls, the crackling of the fire filling the comfortable silence between us. That fireplace had always brought me comfort through childhood and into adulthood. I'll miss that feeling. I had decided to step out onto the porch for a cigarette. I know, I need to quit. And honestly, maybe now is the time because I've never valued my life more than I do at this moment, standing here, terrified. As I exhaled, watching the smoke curl into the cold air, I noticed a light flickering through the trees. A flashlight. Normally, that wouldn't be a big deal, but I knew this town. I knew the people. This was a place filled with elderly vacationers and families with small kids. There was no logical reason for someone to be wandering through the woods alone at this hour. I hesitated for a second, then grabbed the flashlight from the porch and shined it in the direction of the movement. And that's when it happened. The second my beam hit the trees, the other flashlight, about 100 feet away, whipped around and pointed directly at me. It didn't move. It didn't waver. It just stayed there, locked onto me, its blinding glare cutting through the darkness. I felt a jolt of panic, my pulse thudding in my ears. Slowly, I lowered my own flashlight, hoping maybe they would do the same, but they didn't. The light stayed fixed on me, unwavering, watching, and that's when I knew whoever was out there wasn't lost. They weren't passing through. I shouted for my boyfriend to come outside, my heart pounding, my breath fogging in the cold night air. He stepped onto the porch, his eyes narrowing as he followed my gaze into the trees. The flashlight was still there, thank God. For a split second, I'd been terrified that when he came to check, it would be gone, like something out of a horror movie, that he'd tell me I was just imagining things, that I was spooking myself, that I needed to relax. But no, it was still there, still pointed right at us. He understood immediately that this wasn't normal, but my boyfriend isn't the type to get rattled easily. He's protective, logical, and not the kind of guy who backs down from a situation like this. Without hesitation, he turned on his heel, stormed inside, and came back seconds later, fireplace poker in hand. And then he started heading straight for the woods. I grabbed him by the back of his shirt and yanked him back hard enough that he nearly stumbled. Nope, absolutely not. I am not that kind of girl. I am not the adrenaline-driven hero type who wanders into the dark to investigate a strange noise. I make it to horror movie 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to the bitter end when people complain that the franchise has gone on too long. I survive because I am smart, careful, and I do not put myself in danger for the sake of pride. So I did what any sane person, or more specifically, any woman with a sense of self-preservation would do. I called the police. We locked every door and sat by the front of the house, waiting, as the police had instructed us to do. The floor-to-ceiling windows, something that had always been one of my favorite features of the cabin, offering an epic view of the endless woods, now felt like nothing more than a fragile barrier between us and whatever lurked out there. A cold, black void where anything could be watching. 6 minutes later, the cops arrived. By then, the flashlight had faded into the distance and then disappeared altogether. 4 officers stepped out of their cruisers, bundled against the cold, but one of them, young, maybe early 30s, looked downright excited. I guess this was the most action he'd seen in a while. This was not a high-crime area. The worst you'd usually get was a tourist getting their car stuck in the snow. He pulled out a thermal scanner, promising that if anyone was in the vicinity, they'd find them. They combed through the woods, their flashlights bouncing between the trees. My boyfriend and I stood frozen at the window, watching, waiting, barely breathing. 5 minutes later, they came back, and what they told me made the hairs on my neck stand straight up. They didn't find anyone, but they did find something. About 20 feet from the house, hidden just out of view, was a small, freshly built snow fort. Inside, a single blanket, some small dolls made of bundled twigs, and an axe. An axe that had been stolen from our shed. At some point, he had kicked in the old wooden door, shattering the rusted lock. That's where we kept the firewood and kindling. Nothing valuable, nothing worth breaking in for, except for the axe he had taken. The officers said they had a pretty good idea of who had been out there. Apparently there was a man, homeless, mentally unstable, who had been known to break into vacant homes in the area. So far, he had only hit houses that were empty, families gone for the season. They had been after him for a while, but every time he managed to disappear before they could catch him. He would bury himself in the snow, which now made sense of the excitement displayed by the officer gripping the heat-scanning device when the cops first arrived. And now, he had been here, outside my cabin, watching. After the cops told me what they found, I was done. I already knew exactly what I wanted to do. I asked the officers to stay while we packed, and we quickly grabbed as much of our stuff as we could, throwing it into the car haphazardly. I wasn't about to spend another second there. Once everything was loaded up, we drove straight down the road to a nearby hotel, where we booked a room for the night. I was shaken, completely rattled. I couldn't wait to tell my family about it the next day. Not because I thought they could do anything, but because I had to tell someone. It didn't feel real. It felt like the kind of story you hear secondhand, something that happens to other people, but this was my life right now. The night passed, though I don't remember when I finally fell asleep. When we woke up, it was almost 1 p.m., so late that we had to pay a fee for a late checkout. Annoying, but honestly, a small price to pay compared to being watched through my own windows in the middle of the night. After checking out, we headed back to the cabin. I was in such a rush to get the hell out of there the night before that I hadn't cleaned up or grabbed everything, but in the daylight, with the sun shining and neighbors outside playing in the snow, I felt braver. It took about an hour to gather everything from around the cabin, piling it up by the front door before loading it into the back seat. My son's blankets and pillows were still messily crumpled up in a pile over the seats from the ride up, but I didn't care. I just threw everything on top and called it a day. The drive home was quiet. I spent the first half doom scrolling, my timeline now full of eerie crime stories thanks to my frantic Google searches from the night before. I had tried looking up anything about the guy the police mentioned, local break-ins, unsolved cases, but I found nothing. Eventually, I gave up, put my phone down in the center console by my elbow, reclined my seat, and switched to music. My boyfriend and I talked for a while, but exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep for the rest of the drive home. I woke up around 5 p.m. to my boyfriend gently nudging my shoulder. We were home. Too drained to unpack everything, we left a few bags, along with some blankets and pillows, in the back seat. We just wanted to get inside, drink some coffee, and decompress before my boyfriend had to rush off to work his overnight shift at 6. I made him a quick lunch, kissed him goodbye, and watched him drive off. It's been 9 hours. Everything's been normal. I was in my bedroom trying to motivate myself to unpack and clean the house up a bit when I heard something in the living room. A soft thump and a clinking metallic sound. I froze, listening. Then I remembered the new cat tower. One of my cats must have jumped onto it. I cracked my bedroom door open, poked my head into the hallway, exhaling, and sure enough, one of the ball bells hanging from one of the tower's platforms swung rapidly back and forth, as if one of them had just swatted it or leapt off, leaving it swaying. That has to be what I heard. All of this spooky, sure, but nothing serious, right? I should be able to get over it. I should be able to move on with my life, step out into the dining room, and finally fold the pile of laundry that's been sitting on the table for 5 hours. But I can't leave my bedroom. And the reason why is making my throat tighten, like my soul is trying to claw its way out of my body in sheer terror. I had only laid down for 2 minutes. I pulled my phone out, hoping to look at some pictures and videos of my son, his friends, and all of us enjoying our trip to North Conway. A last little moment of nostalgia to settle my nerves. But what I saw instead makes me want to rip my own skin off just to get away from myself. Photos of me, but not normal pictures. They're of me sleeping, and the angle, it's all wrong. Low, close, taken from behind, from the back seat of my car. I dropped my phone, my hands are shaking, my ears are ringing, and then something clicks. The sound I heard in the living room, the noise I brushed off as one of the cats jumping onto the tower. Slowly, I turn my head, and all 4 of them are here sleeping, in my room, on my bed, with me. And the worst part, as I started rubbing my upper thighs over my baggy pajama pants from the night before, something I always do when I'm nervous, maybe it's a stim, who knows, I felt a bulge in my pocket. I reached in and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper, my fingers brushing against something rough. Tiny wooden splinters clung to the edges, stabbing into my skin like the remnants of a broken twig. I did not put this there. My fingers shake as I unfold it. The words make my blood run cold. Thanks for the ride. Sleepover? I don't think I'm alone in my apartment.